Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to Russia in Context. This is the Russian Week in Review. And this past week was not dominated by any one news story, which I was both surprised by and thankful for, because instead we have a bunch of smaller stories, smaller events that we'll examine, and we'll just kind of add them all into the greater patchwork of what's happening in modern Russia. And through learning about them, we'll perhaps arrive at a better understanding of everything that modern Russia is. Now, the freshest news story, and the one that I think is probably the most interesting, is the outage of the Russian side of the internet for hours during the evening of January 30th. Starting around, I want to say 5 o'clock in the evening and going until like 8 or 9. It depended on what region of the country you were in. When people tried to access Russian websites such as Ozon, the local online marketplace similar to Amazon, or Gosuslugi, which is a government website that puts the majority of everyday bureaucracy at this one digital address. It's actually really convenient. Great idea. I don't know if any other countries have it, but it is the one thing that most foreigners love about Russia. Anyway, when people tried to visit those websites, most people were unable to open the pages. Now, that's not to say that the internet didn't work, though, right? WhatsApp, Telegram, messenger services, they continued to work just basically completely unaffected. And the foreign websites, which are not already blocked, like Wikipedia or Google or YouTube, they were working without issue for the majority of people. The only sites that were really affected were those with the .ru domain. Now, such a massive outage immediately led to speculation that the government was behind the whole situation, and to be sure, such paranoia is not unfounded. During the protests I mentioned last week, the ones in Bashkortostan and Yakutia, mobile providers in those regions during the protests just simply cut off internet access. They said it was down, that it wasn't working, but then it just magically came back up when the situation quieted back down. Obviously, they did this to likely make it more difficult for the protests to organize and spread. Additionally, earlier this week, in the region of like St. Petersburg and Pskov and maybe like Novgorod, that area up there north of Moscow, mobile internet was cut off overnight, a lot of times, likely to make it more difficult or impossible for Ukrainian drones to orient themselves in Russian airspace, or perhaps to install measures that would confuse said drones in the future. And let's be real, who can forget all of the discussion that the Russian government has been busy with in the last 2 years about the need for a sovereign internet akin to what China has, right? A sterilized digital domain, quarantined away from all information, deemed undesirable or untrue. Anyway, according to the results of an online survey conducted by the Telegram channel Brief, 42% of the 34,500 respondents believed the outage was connected to the actions of Russian intelligence offices, and Roskomnadzor, which, could probably be compared to the Russian version of the FCC, but with way more oversight and power. Exactly half of the respondents believed the explanation circulated during and immediately after the outage that it was a technical error possibly caused by a programmer. They believed that. And in fact, the government released a statement which said that the problem was connected to the global DNS SEC infrastructure. I honestly don't understand what that means, even though I've read the explanations multiple times. But let's be real, IT isn't exactly my wheelhouse. Now, the remaining 8% of respondents in that survey believe the outage was caused by Ukrainian or Western hackers. Ukraine claimed responsibility for the attack basically immediately after it happened. But no, that's just not what happened. Let's be real. Now, today, the 31st, the day after the outage, one more explanation popped up in the morning, which was that the speed at which IT infrastructure and software is being updated and replaced here in Russia is just simply not sufficient due to sanctions. And then as of filming, another version of what happened made itself known, and that was that the software for generating encryption keys malfunctioned. Again, I don't know what that means. I don't really understand why that would cause the outage, but maybe one of you out there watching does understand all of this and can explain it like you would to a 5-year-old in the comment section. That would be greatly appreciated for others and for myself as well. Anyway, no matter the cause, the outage definitely riled everybody up for, like, let's be real, a number of reasons, whether it be fear of the government actually finally cutting the internet off here in Russia, or just the simple fact that we've all gotten so used to living with the internet that it disappearing, literally whole swaths of it for hours upon hours, is kind of a bit of shock. One thing also is that, especially in the large cities here in Russia, it just as I'm sure it is in the States and it is in Europe, so many of the methods with which people use to pay or services they use are connected to the internet. And so when that goes out, it just causes like a massive problem, we'll say. I'm going to choose a bit more piquant term, but a massive problem. In fact, from what I remember, the economic loss due to this short internet outage was something I think around 200 million rubles, which, like, let's be real, when you convert it to dollars is not much, but still, for a short internet outage, it is substantial. Okay, honestly, the news story that captured the Russian press's attention the most was connected to rumors regarding Zaluzhny, the head of Ukraine's armed forces. Now, however, that news just isn't really connected to Russia in any meaningful way. It is, however, an example of something that happens relatively frequently, specifically the latching onto of any crumb of news that offers a glimmer of hope for things abroad to go Russia's way, either by way of change of sentiment or by a general souring of the situation. Now, you wouldn't believe how many times I read about Trump or Musk here for that very reason. There's never any interest in U.S. politics or Musk's overall antics, but the minute they mention Russia or a subject tangentially related, news channels here reprint it all and run with the story as though journalists here feel the need to act as stand-ins for the Russian government, beaming wildly like a forgotten middle child in the warmth of a parent's attention. Ultimately, yeah, I don't have much to say about that situation. That is Ukrainian in domestic politics, and that's not what this channel's about. I'm sure you can find plenty about that, though. So anyway, moving along. The Belarusian rock group B2 is currently embroiled in a deportation scandal in Thailand, something which normally wouldn't qualify as news, yet here we are. Now, the group, which was big in the Russian rock and music scene in the 2000s, have been against the war in Ukraine and have been quite vocal about their position since the beginning, which led to their shows being canceled in Russia. And they left Russia in 2023, and as of late, evidently have been living in Thailand on tourist visas. Now, the problem was that they played 2 different concerts, which goes against the conditions of a tourist visa, and the group was then detained and scheduled for deportation. The 2 frontmen, Shura and Lyova, have Israeli citizenship and could possibly be deported there, but the other members have Russian passports and may have to, or many are worried that they might get sent back to Moscow and that they could be detained at the border. Now, I don't think that they would face jail time or even mobilization, but A, I don't know if they've been hit with discrediting fines already, or if they have any military experience in which their backgrounds would make them eligible, and B, I don't care enough to check. Regardless, the situation has some wondering if similar fates await other stars and artists who immigrated after February 23rd, 2022. If so, it will be safe to say that Russia is putting pressure on friendly governments to make difficult the lives of vocal opponents of the Kremlin. For now, though, it just looks like a dumb situation of not understanding or just willfully ignoring the nuances of visa rules and restrictions. I want to add a little bit of additional information here, mainly that it does look now, based on like literally some of the latest news that I've seen, that Thailand will either be deporting all of them to Israel or not deporting any of them. The statement that came from the Security Council of Thailand basically said that Thailand will not deport any Russians who face prosecution in Russia. So Thailand, still a safe country for Russians who are looking to escape prosecution, I guess. Again, that said, B2 is a musical group that is really not relevant anymore in any meaningful way. 20 years is a long time ago. They haven't been relevant. But it was a situation that grabbed a lot of people's attention, mainly because of how it could have played out. As it stands right now, it looks like the situation is just going back to settle down. I think Thailand also doesn't want to scare away the thousands of relocated Russians who are, I'm sure, currently putting a decent chunk of change into the local economy. All potential candidates for president have submitted their required signatures, or the gathered signatures, and aside from the four which all appear, everybody expects them to appear on the ballot, right? Putin, Slutsky, Kharitonov, and Davankov. Almost all the others submitted their documentation and then formally dropped out of the race. Not everybody, but a lot of them, but suspicious amount. It's almost as though they were all taking part in this kind of charade to give the election cycle a bit of spice in the lead up to the main event. But then they immediately changed their mind at the stage, which would have put them on the ballots and could have potentially seen them steal away percentage points from the main candidate, Putin. Still, a few outsiders are not throwing in the towel, the most important of which is Boris Nadezhdin, who I mentioned last week. Many are betting that he will be excluded from the election due to not having the correct type of signatures. Obviously, we'll be coming back to this topic next week when the list of official presidential candidates has been finalized, and then we'll talk about all of them and Nadezhdin, even if he doesn't make the list, in greater detail. January 27th marked the 80th anniversary of the end of the siege of Leningrad. Putin went and he laid flowers on a monument just like he did 5 years ago and just like he did 5 years before that as well. And there were plenty of news stories connected to remembering just how horrible everything was during the siege. And it was just a nightmare, to be sure, right? Just a horrible, horrible experience. And the news stories just talking about how wonderful the Soviet Union was during World War II, beating the Nazis. Good stuff, how they saved the world. But the rhetoric was certainly stronger against the backdrop of what Russia, is calling its special military operation, probably because the goal, which they claim is to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. But for me, this event just didn't feel like a solemn and memorable date, which it should be remembered as. Instead, the marking of the end of the siege just felt like seeing the same horse come around again on the carousel. Now, what I mean by that is for as long as I've been here in Russia, the government and the press, let's be real, have made sure to highlight the anniversary of every noteworthy Soviet city that was liberated from Nazi occupation at 5-year intervals. And they also make sure to not let people forget the dates of the start of Nazi aggression or the beginnings of sieges and occupations. Considering that all of these events occurred between 1941 and 1945, a 5-year span, it means that by the time the cycle of remembrance of the 80th anniversary has fully wrapped up, the cycle of remembrance for the 85th anniversary of events will be getting started. I want to be completely clear that I understand the need to remember the actions of Soviet soldiers and citizens during World War II, that their sacrifices that they made to defeating the Nazis should never go forgotten. What they did was incredible. However, Victory Day with its pomposity and military parade and March of the Fallen, it happens every year. And there are thousands of memorials to those who gave their lives across the country in basically every single town. Sometimes there are multiple memorials in a single town. If you live in Russia, it's not possible to forget what was done by the Soviets for future generations, even without all of these memorial days. But is this what they would have wanted? A society that has become so hung up on the feats of its parents or grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents already in some cases, that they identify said former glory as a core part of their national identity. Is this a country of endless remembrance for what was? Again, let me reiterate that I wholly agree with the need to remember our history and be proud of great achievements, to make it so that all people have that knowledge. But honestly, it feels like the Russian government has turned these remembrances into a mantra. Like when you repeat a word so many times, again, that it starts to lose all meaning and context. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm sure somebody will tell me in the comments that I can't possibly understand as a foreigner, right? That this all strengthens and enriches the collective memory here in Russia. But it sometimes doesn't feel like that. It sometimes feels like they're just driving this into the ground, that these actions in the long term are going to negatively impact what was done all those years ago. And honestly, I don't want that to happen. So yeah, it was the 80th anniversary of the end of the siege of Leningrad. And that's a big deal. But maybe let's just hold off on the anniversaries until we hit, I don't know, like 25 years or every 10 years. Every 5 years does seem a bit much. Again, this is a relatively recent turn of events. This did not happen so much in the past. I can't point my finger to when these remembrances started to become more common, but I would guess probably somewhere around the year 2000. Anyway, these are just some loose observations here. Make of them what you will. This is just kind of something that I've seen and thought about, well, regularly. I was going to say every 5 years, but it seems pretty regularly. It is pretty regular. There was plenty of screeching when the International Olympic Committee handed Russian Olympic ice skater Kamila Valieva a 4-year ban, which is counted from the end of 2021. She's been banned from all competitions and stripped of her medals from the 2022 Winter Olympics and European Championships due to her testing positive for doping. Now, a lot of the outrage has been centered on the fact that the sample was taken 2 years ago, right before the Olympics, and that the decision was just handed down now. So clearly, it was politically motivated. The Dirty West, Biden. Now, what the enraged here typically failed to mention was that Valieva tested positive according to a sample provided by the Russian anti-doping agency, and that the reason it took so long for the decision to be made is because the World Anti-Doping Agency gave the Russian agency additional time to complete an internal investigation into the situation, right? Valieva was a minor. She was 15. And that they failed to meet the deadline even after being given an extension for it, which then caused the World Anti-Doping Association to go directly to the court, at which point the Russian Anti-Doping Association decided to publish their results, which amounted to the fact that she was doping, but it was just in the time before the Olympics, so she was disqualified from the Russian championships, but that the Olympic wins should still remain, which is, it's definitely a take, to be sure, right? They didn't even mention any investigation into the coach, Etteri Tutberidze, who probably should have been investigated, given that Valieva was only 15 when she was tested positive for doping. Long story short, there were valid reasons for the ban and the disqualifications and medal stripping and whatnot, but they all seem to get forgotten in the discussion and outrage over everything over here. I guess these things happen, I suppose. It's not like they would intentionally omit those details, right? I didn't mention it last week, but Daria Trepova was sentenced to 27 years in prison. Now, she was the person responsible for bringing an explosive-packed bust to a cafe before it detonated and killed Vladlen Tatarsky and injured 40 others. It was a pretty open and shut case, in my opinion, but it is worth noting that she received the longest prison sentence ever given to a woman in the Russian Federation. This is thanks to a change in legislation that was made last year, which increased the limit for acts of terrorism from a maximum of 25 years up to 30. Vtsiom, I think I'm saying that right, the Russian Public Opinion Research Center, a state-owned polling institution, released the results of a recent survey, which looked to find out about the well-being and kind of the feelings toward people's current living situation, right? By asking them the question, with regards to the life of your family, which goals do you and your family members have? For many, though I'll exclude myself from this group, the most surprising result was that 20% of pensioners answered survive, even if only at the most basic level of existence, which is just hella bleak. That was nearly double the overall average for that same response. If that doesn't give you enough insight into the current economic situation on the ground in Russia, the most popular response to the survey, with 41%, was to not live worse than the majority of families in the respondents' region. That option just kind of shows a shift from dreaming of living better to simply focusing on treading water. I know that this is a trend that we're seeing all throughout the developed world, right? I know that there are other issues at play. However, the reason I'm highlighting this is the 20% of retirees just wanting to scrape by on like the most meager form of existence is some dystopian level stuff. Pensioners in general tend to be forgotten in a lot of societies. However, it is, in my opinion, it does feel even worse here. Also, the reason I'm bringing this up as well, too, is because I have seen, I don't know how many English language YouTube videos about Russia highlighting how cheap it is here, how easy it is to buy food and XYZ. Just, it's a friggin' paradise, and it's the best country on the face of the world. I love Russia, don't get me wrong. There are problems here. And economically speaking, if you're coming to Russia as a Westerner with your salary or your savings in dollars or euros or literally basically any other currency aside from like the Turkish lira, then yeah, it's going to be cheap here for a lot of things, right? Food and insurance and just healthcare, stuff like that. Yeah, sure, that's going to be much cheaper. But Russians don't earn Western salaries, and they earn not in dollars or euros, but in rubles. So there's still a lot of poverty and just difficult living situations. I'm not reveling in this information, but it is important to highlight. And the fact that a state-controlled survey organization published these results also kind of tells me that this is not a problem that they're necessarily trying to hide, that it's so well known here among the populace that attempting to hide this result would just be pointless. To round out the video, I've got a few follow-ups to stories from last week. Exciting, as though you didn't hear enough of it last week. First up, there's been some clarification about which crimes will allow the government to confiscate property, kind of in addition to the main ones. They include genocide, deserting your post or refusing to comply with orders as a soldier, smuggling weapons, drugs or money, bribery, racketeering, spying, and treason, among others. I have to just like, the genocide one is such a weird one to know because I don't know how many people are like actively doing that in Russia on a daily basis, but I guess it's good to know that they'll lose their belongings. All those people out there committing genocide on the daily. Also on the list was mercenary work, which is kind of funny given how many Russians served in the Wagner Group and other organizations like that. The final version of the law, the way it's worded, will allow the government to add more crimes to that list with greater ease in the future. I do want to note that. Now, that said, I imagine that for the near future, most people who have spoken out against the war will have their titles and awards stripped of them, so like celebrities and whatnot, something that the law also allows for. I don't think that the taking of apartments and other forms of property will begin just yet. However, we'll see. It is a punishment. It's a tool that will definitely be beneficial for some people. So it will be interesting to see how it is implemented when they begin to use it. The other story from last week that I want to follow up on is about Twix the cat. Rest in peace. We love our kitties, right? Now, the death of Twix brought some swift changes to rules regarding animals discovered on board trains. Now, with the new changes, in such situations in the future, the animal's owners will be searched for on the train, and if they can't be found, the animal will be placed in the baggage area or something like that until the train arrives at a station, at which time the animal will be handed over to a set of temporary caring hands, like maybe a shelter. See, something like that. And hey, look at that. The Russian government can quickly enact positive changes to rules and regulations when it actually wants to. So I guess that's kind of a positive note that we can end the news segment on. And believe it or not, that's the end of it. That's the end of the news for this week. Like I said, it was kind of a quiet week. Some smaller stories, no one big story that kind of dominated everybody's attention. I am quite thankful for that because I'm already going to have to start working on an overview of the candidates for next week. Like as soon as I get this video put together and upload it, it's going to be right back to gathering information about all the names on the ballots. And then I'm sure over the next week too, there's going to be additional drama with regards to that, if not in other sectors as well. That said, I have no idea how long this is going to be. It could end up being half an hour. I said last time, I was like, I'm sure it was a half hour long, and it ended up being like 50 minutes. So I have no idea how long I talk. I just sit here, and then it just starts going, and then you've hopefully watched to the end of this, and again are listening to me ramble. If that's the case, I do want to, first of all, point out that I am going to be releasing some videos in the coming weeks, not about the news. I'm going to be continuing to do the news, like definitely something I'm not letting up on, but I do want to maybe do some things connected to culture, modern Russian culture, in fact. So keep your eyes open for that. It will be something markedly different. And then, yeah, as the weather does get a little bit warmer, it's only February, but let's be real, here in Russia, we're already dreaming of the springtime, just like I'm sure many of the rest of you who are watching this and are in snowy climates, pronunciation. Anyway, if you're in an area where there's lots of snow, then yeah, you're probably also dreaming of spring. Anyway, enough of that. You'll see the videos when they get released. Hopefully you'll watch them. As it is, hit the like button, you know, the YouTube thing, right? Like button helps the algorithm. The algorithm is the new thing that we all worship, those of us who make videos on YouTube. It's the golden, the brass bull. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Again, I'm rambling. Hit the like button, share the video with your friends, and they can listen to me go on and on in nonsensical fashion. Any questions, any comments, drop them below. I do enjoy seeing them, and I think I've responded to all of them. There have been some good comments and little things here and there. I do appreciate that. So, yeah. Again, hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully it was informative. If not, well, then you are as well versed in current Russian politics and culture as I am, so kudos to you. Anyway, that has been the Russian Week in Review. This is Russia in Context. Thanks for watching.